Compare how this feels with 1987.
Well, there are a couple of different things. I mean, obviously, Tyler, with respect to the feel, in 1987, there were more than 3,000 people on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. The Chicago exchanges, where I covered the crash from that week, were stocked full of people, and the trading rings and the trading pits at the options exchange, the mercantile exchange, and the board of trade were literally individuals shoulder to shoulder. So from that perspective, this feels different because it's been so electronic. Now, the day of October 19th, 1987 may have been, in many ways, the single most profound market experience I've had up until 2008. This feels different in some ways. From a market perspective, it doesn't feel as bad as that. From an economic perspective, it feels far worse. So we're talking about the possibility of 24% on GDP declines in the second quarter, or jobless claims rushing to 2 or 3 million next week, and millions of people unemployed in a short period of time. That never happened after 1987. In fact, the only time it did happen was after the 2008-2009 crisis. So in many ways, this is more of an economic shock than it is a market shock.
I think that's a very, very interesting and apt point, Neela, that this time does feel different because in prior fallouts, whether it was 1987, even in 2007, 8, and 9, you had a sense that something abstract was happening. Here, Neela, it is all too real. People are losing their jobs. Businesses are shut. You can see it. You don't just have to be told about it by CNBC.
Would even add another layer to that already unprecedented feeling that you're getting just by walking the streets of New York City right now, or other cities around the country. This is a health crisis. It's a global pandemic. And so as people are concerned about what's going on in the markets, they're also concerned about their own personal health and the health of their family members. And what we're seeing is a play out of that uncertainty, play out in terms of the economy. We haven't seen the worst of the economic data by any means. That's going on right now, and we'll see that data over the next couple of months. So what we're seeing is a market that's pricing in a worst-case scenario that is now detached from the fundamentals as we know them. Now, we think that those fundamentals will deteriorate, and we'll see that play out with more economic data, but a lot has already been priced into the stock market. We expect the turbulence to continue, but over time, as this health crisis ebbs, we expect to see some better options for investors.
We don't really know what the fundamentals are, do we, Ron?
No, and Tyler, I went back and looked at some of the data from the Great Depression, where we saw from 1929 to 1932, industrial production dropped more than 40%. GDP worldwide over that same period, 3 years, fell 15% in aggregate. We're talking about a 24% decline in the U.S. alone, at least according to Goldman Sachs, maybe 15% if you look at J.P. Morgan, in a single quarter, and immediately in conjunction with this decline in equity prices and all the dislocations we're seeing in credit as well. So this is, in many ways, without precedent as far as financial markets and economics collapsing at the same time. There's typically a lead time between what you see in the markets and what you see in the economy. This is a concurrent event, which is, as the other guest just suggested, is compounded or, in fact, created by a health crisis. So this is the type of triple whammy we've not seen in our lifetimes. I suspect you have to go back to 1918 for some sort of parallel. There's a different market, different economy, different health and medical environment. So for us, this is as new as it gets and really as uncharted as anything we've ever seen.
And as you look back historically, just to make this sort of casual observation, in those prior markets, even going back to 1987, the public's participation in the market was not what it is today. Today, people have 401ks that are tied to market performance. Today, millions and millions of Americans invest in index funds and passive structures like that. So the reach of this economically and into the household is deeper than it was in 1929, deeper than it was in 1987. Neela, let me turn to you. There's been a lot of talk, and we've heard it. It is all well-intentioned, I'm sure. Some of it is well-reasoned, I'm sure, that we should expect a quick snap back, a so-called V recovery here. You buy that?
No, I don't buy it at all. And one of the other reasons, in addition to the connectivity of households to the markets, is the global renaissance that we've seen, the globalization that's really fed this pandemic, but has also been shut down by social distancing. We are an economy fueled by globalization, and for all intents and purposes, there's been a sudden stop in that flow of trade and people across borders. And so that's going to amplify the time to recovery. All that being said, though, we can't forget some of the good parts of the economy that will help sustain through this really rough patch and into a recovery, and that is the health of banks. Very different from 2008, where the banks were the source of the disease. The credit markets, as bad as they are symptoms of the disease. They are not the source of the disease. And so some of that Fed action, that unprecedented level of Fed intervention that we're seeing, not just in the U.S., but in central banks around the world, will help these credit markets and soothe some of the price dislocations we're seeing. So I am not an optimist in terms of a V-shaped recovery. I am an optimist, though, over the long term, that we eventually beat this all.